Welcome to L&D Disrupt, the podcast dedicated to helping you overcome workplace challenges and prepare for the future of work today. I'm your host, Nelson Sivalingam, and I'll be speaking with the movers, shakers, and path breakers in L&D who are reshaping their organizations right now. Join us each week as we delve into the highs and lows of work in the industry to get to the real nitty-gritty stuff that you actually care about. We'll kick off and the latecomers can join. As you know, this is L&D Disrupt. Welcome to another episode. This is brought to you by How Now, and today I'm your step-in host, Nelson Sivalingam. I know normally you're used to the great Gary Stringer. I'll try to live up to Gary, but no promises. And I'm also joined today by Ron Stock, who's an incredible people leader who I think has gone through one of the craziest company growth journeys I've seen, I think from a couple of hundred to a couple of thousand employees in a ridiculous short period of time. So lots of learnings and war stories to share. And he's also one of the nicest guys in the people space. So really happy to have Ron on the show. Ron, welcome. Today we're going to be having a super honest conversation about measuring and managing performance. But before we go into that, Ron, I'd love to hear your life story in about 2 minutes.
Thank you very much for the very kind words there, Nelson. So for those who don't know me, I'm Ron Stock. I've been in HR for the last 10 years, near enough, and spent most of my career in tech, financial services, and cloud communications. I'm a self-proclaimed talent development expert, which means I geek out on getting the most out of people in corporate environments. And one of my latest stints was growing, as Nelson alluded to there, one of the fastest growing fintechs in the world, checkout.com, where I was acting as the director of people development, looking after the entire L&D, performance, onboarding, and more portfolio. It's great to be.
Incredible to have you, and looking forward to our chat, Ron. So kind of kicking it off, we speak to a lot of senior executives who kind of find the whole measuring and managing performance a bit of a daunting task, and actually, to be honest, quite a time-consuming task. And that often ends up being one of two extremes. Either people who don't want to put in the work and therefore go with gut feels, or you've got the other extreme where it's kind of spreadsheets of numbers to track KPIs, and it's very kind of number-heavy approach. And, you know, both of those have different consequences. But kind of stepping back to understand, what are the consequences of getting that process wrong?
Gosh, the list is probably longer than my arm, Nelson. I mean, getting this right is essential, not just for the growth of your employees, but the overall and long-term success of the business. Aligning employees effectively with the direction, the strategy, the goals of the organization is absolutely critical, if not before, but even more now. And the potential downfall of getting this wrong really can lead to a completely demoralized staff, burnout, bad relations between managers and team members and team members and team members, politics running rife throughout the organization rather than merit, non-inclusive environments when you look at people from a too particular lens about being inclusive, about who you include from the wider performance and geographical world. There are a lot of elements here which makes performance an absolute essential key part of your people philosophy and strategy, and a key part of a differentiator as a business competing in the market.
I think it makes it absolutely clear why you shouldn't get this wrong. So let's find out how we can get this right. Starting off with, I guess, what's the building blocks of performance management and measurement?
So let's start with the lovely and quick to understand definition. So what is performance management? In short, it is a set of practices that allow an organization to, 1, assess, 2, improve, and 3, maintain the performance of their people. Assess, improve, maintain performance of their people. Examples of this are performance reviews, one-to-ones, goal setting, all things we should have, and many of us have seen in our careers and been part of. Now, when you think about, if you was to take this complex world of performance management at times and make this super simple, I would give you 3 key building blocks. 1, the what. the what was achieved. 2, the how. So how did we get there? And 3, where can I improve? Based on the what, the how, where can we focus on to take me and my career to the next level? So this is the first takeaway straight away in this session. So I hope you've got your pens ready. It's the what, the how, and the where. So when we think about performance management, these are the 3 key building blocks that we need to focus on.
And do you find, Ron, often we spend too much time on the what and not necessarily going beyond that to kind of how and definitely not where? Do you find that?
100%, Nelson, you're completely on the ball here. And actually, I'll take us to a scenario of what we've seen a lot of companies today and what I've seen throughout my career. We do spend way too much time overemphasizing on the what. And when we speak about the what we're really talking about is setting targets, setting goals. Okay, so this can be in the form of, there's 10 plus different goal setting methodologies out there. So SMART goals, KPIs, etc. And there isn't enough focus on the how, which is how we got there. So let me give you a hypothetical situation. Say you have this company, and over the next 3 months, they set these gargantuan targets they need to deliver. They need to launch their products and services across all over the world to increase revenue streams. Now, to do this, they know they're going to ×4 their workload of their team members. They've even sent messages out saying, hey, guys, this is going to get really difficult now. Now, let's just say, by the grace of the above, they manage it. They manage it in 3 months and they're all celebrating. Yes, we did it. But what about if I told you the other part of that story, where bridges were burned, where politics are rife in terms of getting your project over the line, where teamwork went downhill, where stress, morale, burnout is everywhere because you pushed the team too fast, too quickly, and we didn't make the assessment of how you got there, building great relationships, working together. That didn't fit into the core essence of how you're assessing success. And then the question I ask to you and everyone in the room is that a company, whilst they got their 3-month target, but at what cost? And is that a company that will survive in the long term and compete and thrive in the market they're trying to be a leader in? So that leads us really perfectly onto why the what and the how are incredibly important. And when I'm going to drill down into these key components about how we look at this from a performance measurement perspective, giving you tactical takeaways to embed this into your processes at your organizations.
It makes complete sense. I think with what we've seen in the kind of tech market fallout with this mindset of growth at all costs and hitting those numbers, and actually the consequences of that versus actually focusing on a more kind of sustainable approach to growth and growing responsibly. So yeah, definitely kind of hear you on that. So I guess, how do you do it, right? How do we go towards the also measuring and managing the how rather than just stopping at the what? So as it's a two-folded approach here, when we speak about the what, of course, as mentioned, we're talking about setting goals. And just to give a little bit more context before we dive into the how, there's 4 key areas which you need to be focusing in on where you measure performance with the what. The first part of the employee lifecycle you need to be focusing on, so I hope you're taking this one down, is exactly when the employment journey starts. So probation, the first 90 days, the first 180 days, depending on where in the world you are, you class this differently. Now, what characterizes this very well is the manager needs to lead this goal setting process, and the employee, dependent on their seniority and the state of play the business is in, should collaborate for a bit of extra buy-in. Now, again, that does depend on the seniority of the role. The second stage, okay, so that's the start. The second stage is what I call continuation, okay? So this is once the beginning phase of employment is done, now they've shown they have the skills to execute this role. They deserve to be here. Now you flip the switch. And the employee needs to lead this. And actually, this is something many companies get wrong today. They are not allowing employees to lead the goal-setting process once they've established themselves as they can do this. That gets maximum buy-in. But you don't just leave them astray. Okay, lead it, do it, great. The manager should constantly be there as a guidance. So they're not completely vacant. They should be approving them. They should be going, that looks great.
Let's make sure we're attuning it to where the business is going still. But that's awesome. Love the enthusiasm. The third stage is transition. And this relates to two components, whether you move horizontally. Okay, so say I'm moving from people to legal or finance, which I would never do, by the way, but imagine I did, then I would need my manager to really lead the dance again. Tell me what these goals are. And dependent on my seniority, my interest, and my pre-assessments, maybe have a bit of collaboration too. And then if it's vertical, so I'm being promoted, dependent on how much of a jump that is, will then depend how much hand-holding I'm going to need. If it's one step up, then maybe I can really lead that dance still too, showing my enthusiasm. And actually, to keep the bar high, we'd really want people to do that. But if it's a very big step and we're pushing this person, stretching them out of pure belief and capability, then maybe there needs to be a bit more manager guidance. And then the fourth stage of the employment journey, which you need to be focusing on how you measure the what, is PIPs, performance improvement plans. This fundamentally really is when things aren't going so well. This, of course, is not a collaboration. This is when the manager and the people team are enforcing the goals that need to be completed to prove adequate skill set for the role in hand. So these are the four key elements of the employee journey and life cycle that you really need to be focusing in on to get maximum yield on the measurement of performance. One little tip here is what would really help this be successful and grow into something that's great and reaches its full potential is to ensure your company has set their goals. The division, the department, and the team have the clear direction within that. So they are working within a successful, productive environment. I read a great article yesterday, shared actually by someone in the audience, Amina. She's just there. And I read it on LinkedIn, and it said actually something really important that I never thought about too hard. And it was that our productivity is 90% the outcome of our digital environment, of how we enable the access to knowledge or not so, how we enable people to understand where our projects are rather than sending countless emails asking what tools are we using. So this rings true to that notion. Ensure that the environment is set around for you to tackle these four key areas of goal setting. Now on to the how. So that's the what, okay? When we speak about the how do we measure this? I have one answer for you, and I call it the skills proficiency. So long and short is, we need to be measuring skills as a form of currency and ability to do a task. And by definition, that's exactly what it is. Funny enough, when you go online and you look at skills, you get all these words come up. You have capability, skills, competency. And I don't know about you, but I literally lose my mind looking at this stuff. So I sat down and thought, right, well, where do we need to focus? And how do we make this ultra simple? Because ultimately, we know if we can get a complex topic and simplify it, our audience is going to engage way better. Our managers, they're going to play ball with us. So skills, and by definition, a skill is the ability to perform a particular task. That's it. A skill is the ability to perform a particular task. And there are three key categories of skills. I'm going to walk you through them right now, because these are the categories you're going to need to build out for each of your roles to measure performance. So the first skill category is what I call technical skills. These are occupation specific. It's why I'm not an engineer, but I'm in the people field. I have technical skills in the people field that enable and qualify me to be here. You could go a step deeper into that and actually build out general versus niche. Depending on how far you want to go, and general would be agnostic skills, using Microsoft Word, right? This is occupation specific, but very basic, using systems within that profession. And the niche would be, for example, .NET, Java for a developer, employment law for a people professional, IP for a lawyer, and so forth. So that's the first skills, technical. The second category is personal. And this is about working independently. So the skills needed to be an effective, independent contributor. So that's critical thinking, problem solving. And then the third category here is social skills. And this is about how we work with others. And that's communication, that's relationship building, even empathy skills. And what you'll notice is what specifically doing, intentionally doing here, is I'm actually splitting what the notion of soft skills. Number one, they're not soft skills, they're people skills, because they're actually fundamentally incredibly important. And number two, there are two categories of them. You can have someone that's incredible, has incredible personal skills, but maybe their social skills are lacking. How do you make that tangible for people's performance and their measurement? How do you break down exactly where they're doing well and exactly where they need to improve? So these are the three key skill areas, but there's one more I'm going to add in, and this is subject to the role and your company, and it's called leadership skills, right? But the leadership skills are actually a culmination of technical, personal, and social. They're actually different parts of all three, okay? But it depends on your organization. So for you to really identify what they are, I would strongly suggest working with your team, the management, the leadership there, what's important to us from a leadership perspective, and pulling those pieces out.
There's so much there to unpack, Ron. And before I come to that, I just want to let everyone know you can post your questions in the chat. And if you're comfortable to do so, you can come and ask Ron yourself. If not, I'm happy to read out your question for you. Keep them coming in the chat, and where relevant, I will bring them in. Coming back to kind of measuring skills, and actually the point you made around kind of skills and competencies, do you find there's people use it quite interchangeably? Because I find that in conversations where, you know, skills and competencies are kind of used within the same context, and kind of, what do you think is a consequence of doing that?
Absolutely. When we speak about the measurement of skills and competencies, there are a few key differences of why competencies are of the old and skills need to be your future plan. And just one final point to add, when we're measuring skills, what's incredibly important is that you have a proficiency scale for every skill. So when we talk about a tactical takeaway, here's another one, okay? When you've got your skills, you need to have a proficiency scale. Let's just say I would start with 4 or 5, start as simple as possible, starting from training required through to you're a trainer. You can coach other people on this skill. An example skill, Excel intermediate, being trained all the way through to teaching others, Excel advanced. You see how tangible these things are. They're way more tangible. Now let's go to your question. Competencies, capabilities, skills, gosh. Okay, so competencies in particular are everywhere. And what are they? They are a cluster of variables such as knowledge, behaviors, attitude, skills, and sometimes even experience. Now, let me ask everyone in the room, how are we measuring that? How are we demonstrating that? Where did it come from? Historically, they originated in the 1970s, which by my maths means the majority of our workforce today were not even born. But yet we're applying it to all of our people across the board as if it's the mecca of career development and progression. Fundamentally, it's an old concept. And while sometimes things that worked before can work today, this isn't. Because work has changed over the last 50 years. We are much more team-based. Our projects are fluid and agile. They're based on client demand and ever moving and ever changing. So if it's not obvious, what are the challenges with having a competency matrix and having all these things bundled into this lovely paragraph you've written and people need to understand? Is they're hard to understand. That's the first part. Number two, because they're hard to understand, everybody makes a subjective interpretation of what they're reading. Both the manager and the employee will read the same thing and go, right, this is what I've got to do. This is what you've got to do. They're probably not aligned unless they have a really deep, meaningful conversation. What does that mean? They take too much effort. They take way too much explanation. Nelson mentioned it earlier, too much time. So having skills as a methodology becomes way more tangible because they're easier to demonstrate. There's no layers of complexity. They are better and more clearer for employee navigation, employee measurement in the performance cycle, but also there are a huge benefit. There's huge benefits for the business. And here are some of them. By having a true skills matrix across the organization, you actually create something called a skills economy. Okay, that's a skills economy. It's an incredibly important topic and concept where you can have a full view of all the skills across your business from top to bottom, from every role in every division, every department. Why would you want to do that? Well, long and short is you start to understand where your skill gaps are This starts to inform your hiring process. This informs where you upskill and put most of your investments. God knows how much money we spend in L&D, and trying to get it into the right place is incredibly important to win buy-in and have credibility for the work we do. But also, it allows the business to pair people up with strengths-based work, allowing them to perform at their best. We're talking about performance here, each and every review cycle. So let's take this a bit further. What else would it help us do? It would help us have more effective career mobility programs. So in my experience, I've run career mobility programs for years. I've done it at checkout.com. I helped and had a team who successfully remobilized, we call it, hundreds of people successfully, not just interdepartmentally, but all the way across the world. Okay. And we actually saw a massive increase in length of service, retention by about a year and a half on average per person who went through the program, which was a true testament to the commercial viability and success of the program. But what we were doing was being quite reactive. With skills and having your skills economy set in stone, using it as a way of performance, as the real anchor of why it's being done so frequently, you actually have a real insight from a business perspective and as an employee of what skills transfer to other roles. Because that's another problem of competencies, because there are so many elements in there. We have this complexity and we end up not being able to compare like for like. I ran also a competency matrix program. Okay. I actually launched this across 2,000 people. Okay. And guess what? It was a mistake because it was competencies. And guess what? They were straight away, they quickly became outdated. Also, I wouldn't recommend doing this in Google. Definitely get a platform. Another key takeaway here, because they are incredibly manual and no one wants to look after them, okay, once they're done. And getting them done is a nightmare. But what I'm saying is, we had at one point at least 3 to 4 different definitions of what communication meant, dependent if you're in revenue, marketing, engineering. That doesn't allow a business to see who's got what. Whereas skills, simple, tangible. One proficiency scale, universal. We can see who's got what and where. So
yeah, I love it. I mean, it always amazes me when we speak to organizations where they're tracking, hundreds of different KPIs, but many of them don't track skills, right? And so they don't know what skills they have and don't have in the organization. So how the hell are you supposed to close these skills gaps if you don't know what they are in the first place? And I think you're almost acting with ignorance, that not knowing the impact and the cost actually of inaction of closing these skills gaps and the kind of impact it's having both on the workforce as well as the business performance. But kind of coming to measuring skills, Ron, I think often what we see with organizations once we start this conversation around measuring skills, there's kind of 2 fundamental approaches. One is the kind of objective, let me give this person a very long assessment, see how they ace that assessment, and based on that, I give them a skills proficiency. And then you've got the more kind of subjective route, which is almost like a 360 feedback loop of me giving you a proficiency rating for your skills. I know at How Now we have our kind of preference, but it'd be great to kind of understand from your take, what have you seen? Have you tried both? Which approach do you think works better?
Gosh, I think they all complement each other. So having a self-assessment perspective where you self-assess your skills in your performance review or beyond and continuously is effective, but not as much, because sometimes some people have something called an illusionary superiority complex where they're actually not hyper competent, but they believe they are. And so what happens is we end up getting highly inaccurate skill ratings and skill levels for people across many parts of the organization. But it's still somewhat effective to get a general gist, but it's not the all in all overall score. The other piece here, as mentioned, is true assessments. And this really becomes an examination for one, which is highly intensive and difficult to pull off. But there are tools out there which are fantastic, particularly in engineering. For example, they are pioneering the field, I would say, who are able to assess exactly where you are with your technical skill set, your occupational skill set in .NET, in Java, in Python, whichever one it is. So the most accurate would be an assessment for sure. It is the most time consuming, it is the most laborious, and it is also the most costly from a business perspective, but it is the most effective. One other element, as you did mention too, is is the feedback when you have 360-degree reviews on other people's skills from their colleagues. And that actually is incredibly effective. Granted, you've got the right people giving the feedback. So make sure the right people are being selected for a given person who actually have exposure to comment on that. And then the last piece, which is actually a tactical takeaway, is on the goal setting and how you get skills in the goal setting process. This is the magic, okay? This is where you set goals, your team members are setting goals, but what's incredibly important is that for every goal that's being set, it should be clear and written in the drop down, whatever associated, what skills are being flexed in this goal. And they become a point of conversation for that performance review, for that one-to-one. So delivered this goal, I feel like I flexed my communication, presentation skills, negotiation, my influence ability. I did this across a various amount of stakeholders. And this proves that I'm at X level. I'm level 4 out of 5 or 5 out of 5. What do you think, my dear manager? And then they'll say, okay, well, yes, no, I think you did well there. And yeah, we're there. So, and that's an incredibly effective way to mold it into your conversation. And money-wise, it doesn't really cost much. So it's about getting a great platform that can enable that too. And then last point, if I may, on why, on the skills element here that we're talking about and bringing that in. One other thing that I feel quite passionate about is creating a more inclusive and diverse workforce. Skills are an effective way to do that. If we think about competencies and we think about the notion of experience being constantly bundled in there, how do you get experience? Well, you get experience with time. What happens with time? Well, you age. So what we're naturally doing here is we're tending to offer the exciting opportunities to those who are maybe more senior in their career in life, not based on skills though, but because they're more senior and actually, yes, they're the director. They look the part. I'm sure they'll be the part. But maybe you've got someone all the way across the world, okay? Maybe they're 10 years younger, but they've had a completely different experience in a short period of time and they have the skills. They have the skills. If you would just assess them through that, they could potentially do that job just as good. So what do we end up doing? We end up steering the future of work through this methodology. We end up being more inclusive as an employer. We end up targeting countries with incredible, massive labor pools that we're not speaking to today, and we're over focusing on some of the wrong elements.
Absolutely, and I think it probably is, like you said, finding the right blend of kind of objective and subjective ways of measurement. But I think often what we've seen in companies that have gone kind of full on the objective true assessment route is you end up kind of backing the self-fulfilling prophecy where, just because I aced an assessment about leadership, you almost assume this person comes out of the assessment as a great leader. And I think you fall into the trap of kind of rewarding people who know more, but not necessarily the people who do more. And I think that's a huge risk when just basing it on the true assessments. And that's why I'm a big fan of anything that brings in 360 feedback, including self-assessment, as well as peer and manager feedback, because actually the best people to evidence whether you're applying what you've learned and developed are the people who work with you, right? There's no good me going around saying I'm a great leader if the people who work with me can't see that on a day-to-day practice application level. And I think, definitely worth kind of exploring that balance between evidencing the application of that skill versus, the people who are able to essentially reel off facts and information, but are not necessarily putting it to work.
Interesting comments there. And it takes me to another topic, which I had as an optionality for this session. It's quite interesting and I'm working my way through it. It's quite a complex one, but I'll make this super simple. It's attitude. And that what really came out to me. So you can have all the skills in the world. You can achieve all the goals in the world, perhaps. But if you haven't got the right attitude, okay, and what is attitude? Well, by definition, it's a combination of 3 different things, right? And with these 3 things, we need to be able to break them down and truly understand them at company level and measure them objectively. But that's incredibly hard to do. And what they are, it's what I call the BEB model, okay? So it's super simple, BEB. It's beliefs, emotions, and behaviors. These are the 3 things that build our attitude, okay? This is the definition of what an attitude is. It's our belief system that impacts our emotions, which drives our behaviors. Now, let me give you an example. My belief system is that dinosaurs are incredibly scary. I go and see a dinosaur in the street for some strange, bizarre reason in the world I'm living in, okay? And entertain me here. I see a dinosaur. I believe that's dangerous. So my emotion is I'm frightened, I'm scared. And my behavior, I'm running for my life, okay? I'm running for my life. Now, the tricky thing is, our belief systems are our own. And the objective part here is only the behaviors. So when we're looking at attitude, all we can really focus in on in terms of constructive feedback is looking at the behaviors. And if you're a manager or a people professional and you're trying to unpick the behavior in this conversation, you're talking about what went well, what didn't, try and understand the emotions and their belief systems. That's a really good way to reverse engineer this. The other piece here, which I found particularly useful and I have used to great effect, is using the values of the company as a methodology of aligning the belief system and therefore aligning the behaviors of your people. So this is another good way to try and bring a measurement and a rule of saying, this is what we expect at belief system level. I want to know what you believe. Are you aligned with that? Your behaviors don't quite look like they're next to that. And so that's something we need to work on. Or they do. You're a complete advocate and ambassador of our company culture, and it shines through everyone you talk to. So attitude is something super important, because if you can have all the skills in the world, all the technical skills in the world, but if I don't have the right attitude towards getting that job done, I fundamentally just don't want to do it, then perhaps I'm not the right person to get that promotion. I'm not the right person to be pushed forward. And so it's a very interesting dynamic. The truth is, though, that, again, measuring attitude is incredibly tough. So keeping this non-subjective is incredibly important, because if your manager walks into and goes, I think you're lazy, I think that's what you are. And I've actually seen this, by the way, horrific. I think you're lazy. The team member goes, how dare you call me lazy? Instead, focus on the behavior of where they missed the deadline. They didn't do more than what you expected. Talk about that and unpick and unwind how they got there.
I love that. We've got a question related to skills and bringing it into the organization from Linda. Linda, do you want to come on and ask the question? If not, I'm happy to
Sure. Sorry. Hi, how are you? I was curious about if you're at a company, a large, older company, who really wants to employ this kind of skill-based matrix for employees. I mean, everything that you're saying resonates with the ambitions of the organization I'm in. I think the question is, if what you have shared doesn't exist or is somewhat sort of bifurcated in terms of a system or a process, where do you start? Would you like, and not just where would you start? I'm going to push you to go year one, you'd focus on this, year two, year three. Like, so why would you leave one part of this to year three? Like, help me understand the cadence a little bit.
Got it. So when you're considering this project, number one, given the size of your employees, you are going to need to identify a partner, a skills platform. This is my advice to anyone at any size, really, or most sizes, 50 plus employees. And I imagine you've got a wealth of different departments, divisions, professions. So even more so, this is your starting point straight away. Once you get this partner on board, it will be a case of figuring out what are the important skills to your business per role. And that will be a lot of deep research, a lot of partnering with this third party to understand your business and to understand exactly what needs to be down for what roles and what proficiency levels are needed. So when we're talking about the beginning, it's picking a partner. It's then identifying all the roles across the board and the levels and being able to align that with an industry standard expectation on the skills and the proficiency levels across other companies who've embedded this. Once you have that general understanding of where you're aiming for, then I would say, depending on how long that takes, every company moves at different paces. So giving exact timelines would be trivial depending on what size of organization you are for everyone else in the room. But what I would say is once you get that down, then identify exactly where you want to start, who you want to start with, who's got the biggest and most buy-in, what managers are screaming for this and which are kind of a bit hands-off. And that's where I would project manage this for the first year, etc. Really getting the benefit from those advocates who are already bought in or don't need a huge push to get over the line. Once you get that rolling and you get iterative feedback on what's working and what's not, going into year 2 and 3, it's about capturing everyone else who sees and who initially saw this as an additional process or something else they've got to do, which is constantly what we're faced with, whichever process we're putting in.
Just to add to that, we've kind of brought in skills measurement into many organizations, ranging from 100-person organizations to 100,000 employee organizations. And typically found the kind of first point is actually agreeing on the organizational taxonomy or library for skills. Now, this in itself, it probably deserves an episode because there are different approaches to it. But the way not to do it is to spend almost 9 to 12 months pulling together an Excel spreadsheet that has everyone and anyone contributing to it, right? I think today, actually, there's a lot of data out there and companies dedicated to providing skills taxonomies. For example, how now our approach is actually to scrape and analyze job market data to find what skills are being hired for in the job market. And that gives you your overall taxonomy, which changes over a period of time. But there's also static libraries, etc. Now, that's the first thing, is getting that taxonomy, agreeing on that across the organization, and then mapping those skills to both the job roles in the organization as well as the individuals within the organizations. And it's really important not to limit it just to job role, because you might think I should have skills ABC because I'm a sales rep, but actually I might also have these additional skills you didn't think about, right? I might also be an Excel wizard, which you didn't expect from my job role. So I think that mapping is critical. Now, once you have that mapping, the first win is being able to have some measurement of skills in the organization in the first place. And you deliberately want to make this light touch and reduce the friction to capturing that data. So this is where I would lean more towards either, going down the true assessment route or collecting the 360 feedback and just getting that proficiency score. Out of 5, I've done a self-assessment. I've invited some of my senior colleagues and my manager. Now you have an average score, proficiency score for each one of the skills. So straight away, you have a win and a proof to show back to the business, which is we didn't know what skills we had in the business. Now we do, and we also know where the gaps are. And so that in itself builds that momentum that you need to drive skills across the organization. And I think that the third piece, and the one that's kind of continuous, is incorporating the skills data and this check-in process into all of the performance-related process you have in your organization, from the one-to-ones and to career conversations, to how you do recruitment, to how you do career mobility. So that skills data now needs to feed into the rest of your employee experience. And that you don't do in one big bang go. Actually, you pick out those projects. How are we going to use this to support talent mobility? How are we going to do this to have one-to-ones? And each one of those are separate projects. But I think that the first win is getting taxonomy mapping and get those ratings in so you finally have a score on the board and you're measuring skills. Belinda, thank you very much for your question. I just wanted to pick on the kind of pushbacks you might get, right? So for an organization, again, building on what Linda asked, you don't have skills measurement in the organization. You don't have this way of looking at performance measurement and management. What's the kind of common pushback you might get?
Absolutely. Well, the number one piece is time, for sure. I don't have the time, sorry, Ron, to write this up, because you're going back to Linda's question in particular, when the partnership with the managers are happening, you really need their buy-in, whoever you're working with, to say, these are the skills I'm actually seeing in the role. Actually, no, what you've got there doesn't apply to us. This applies. And for them to do that process is time consuming. But also the other element of what comes in beyond that is actually a lack of knowledge. Going on the assumption that our managers understand this topic is the wrong assumption. This is no, downplay on them, of course. It's a very complex topic and you need to be quite intentional when you want to learn about this. You've got to really sit down, focus and read quite a bit. So giving them an education on why this is important is going to be fundamental, because there's a skill gap with their understanding. You're probably going to have managers who have a vast array of different opinions on capabilities, competencies, skills. It depends on what their background is and what they've experienced prior to this point. So I'd say it's time and it's the knowledge gap that's going to be really difficult to solve.
Great. And kind of moving on, once you've got this performance measurement data, right? The age-old thing you end up with is trying to map who your best performing talent or high performing talent is. And often you end up with this bell curve, one end you've got your low performers, let's say, and the other end you've got the high performers and everyone else is in the middle. Do you think that bell curve still works?
No. Absolutely not. And you know what the crying shame is? There are so many businesses right now who are employing that, who are putting that into place and tarnishing quite a few things within their workforce, like innovation, teamwork, collaboration, and more. And a bit of a history lesson on the bell curve. But exactly as Nelson mentioned, imagine this graph and imagine all your people pivoted like a bell in this line. Right, you have your middle, your bottom end, your top end. Now, actually, this dates back all the way to the 1700s from statistical data analysis, where they needed to identify lower and top end anomalies. That's where it started. It then shifted into education, particularly with engineer examination, where they'd find a mean score of the engineering exam test, and they'd have the outside anomalies, the lower anomalies, and those will be the top and bottom, and these will be the average, okay? In an environment where everybody's completely siloed and individualistic, my own exam, my own success, perhaps this can be a bit more effective. But then in the 1990s, it was then introduced into the corporate world by a company called GE and was quite largely successful for a few years. And remember, this is 30 years ago. Things were very different 30 years ago. There's a lot of things we talk about today which would never even be muttered out of anyone's, And so the world has changed. And what we have now are companies who have actually used it. So I've actually done some more research. Microsoft used it. Google used it, Cisco used it, and more. And they've all gotten rid of it. They've all completely dropped it. And why? I'll take you to a case study with Microsoft, sorry. They had it, and it's documented now as the lost decade. It's documented as a lost decade where their innovation, their team working, their culture completely plummeted. And as management reported it, went completely toxic. Because what happens when you start to naturally pick people off? Because what a bell curve is designed to do, it's actually a method of comparing employees against each other. Now, in an environment where we're so project-driven, team-focused, collaborative needed, is that the right approach? Do you build the right culture that will thrive when you are pitting equals against each other? Am I going to work with you as best I can when I know at the end of the day, in this conversation, I'm going to be compared to your success versus mine. I've got to do better than you. That's not teamwork. That's not driving innovation. That's not going to create an incredible company that's going to compete in the market. And there's actually a saying, a quote actually I found from a leader that was at Microsoft for 12 years, 30 plus years experience, CEO, founder, investor, and quote unquote, the bell curve appraisal is an unnecessarily aggressive invention that damages human relationships. In large organizations, politics take over. So if your company are doing bell curves, AKA forced distribution, where they've agreed we're 100% going to have 20% in the bottom pile and they're going to be put on a pip or exited, and we're 100% going to have 10%, I would strongly recommend you stop doing that. I would strongly recommend you put some data together to show why that's not a good idea. And if you take Microsoft's case, these are the years when Apple completely leapfrogged them with innovation, with team working. And this is why it's so documented that this just doesn't fit today anymore due to the nature and changing world of our work.
And what does the alternative look like, Ron?
And we've alluded to it a few times here. It's 360-degree feedback. So you can actually trust the feedback you're getting, the overall picture of an employee, rather than having to go, this arbitrary score we've given people, let's notch it down one. That makes more sense. And it's done by someone who hasn't seen your role, doesn't know what work you're doing, but needs to make the numbers work. So getting a true 360-degree process that you can believe in, stand by in, managers that are trained to go and do this process, employees who are trained and bought in, ensuring frequent and effective one-to-ones, training managers on feedback giving, goal setting, and how to do a skills assessment using your new platform you've just introduced of all the proficiencies of where people are, and ensuring employees are trained on all these things too. We end up over focusing a bit on the managers, but we also need to make sure our employees know how to navigate this, know how to set their own goals. And actually what I would say is the way they create bell curves is by giving these arbitrary performance scores. And it's not scientifically created, which is the problem. If it was scientifically created and if performance scores weren't severely adjusted, which is what happens to make the numbers meet, then it maybe wouldn't be so bad. But the whole premise of it is it's a forced distribution. So 360-degree performance reviews, continuous feedback, frequent one-to-ones, training managers, employees on feedback, goal setting, skills assessment, embedding this into the culture of your business and having this as a continuous process that happens all throughout the year. So we're constantly seeing where they are in terms of their goals and where they should be versus where they are in terms of the skill proficiency at the role and level they're in.
We've got a question here from Lizzie Rom, which is, what do you think the pros and cons are of decoupling the link between performance and reward? What do you think of the pros and cons?
Oh, it's a great question. That's a great question. And I enjoy that question because I do believe that top performers should be rewarded as top performers. To keep your top performers incentivized. And these are the people that are really going above and beyond in the role that they're doing, which is beyond your expectations. I think it is fair and a smart thing to do to give them more of the pie. The tricky thing, though, is there's many techniques to do this. In Microsoft, for example, managers get given a budget and they go, here's your budget, here's your team, divide that. Now, if a manager was to divide that equally, so irrespective of performance, just to be fair, he would lose his top talent. And he would also stifle innovation and he will stifle performance because we're not rewarding the best behaviors and the best outcomes. So I do think there's a linear connection. I think performance should be driving reward. That's what I honestly think. And I think it should be transparent. So your compensation philosophy should be transparent in what you believe in. And if you can, making your bandings transparent and having that journey clear for people to navigate. So the short answer is I believe in the connection. However, I think the right technique of making sure your top performers are rewarded the most is important and critical for the success of that philosophy.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to kind of add to that, I think the risk often we see with L&D teams is when you set the expectation that, building skills X, Y, Z, or getting this particular qualification, you end up creating a culture where people think, well, actually, if I go on that course and get this qualification, that means I'm now ready to be promoted. And actually, that shouldn't be the outcome of their development. It should always be based on their performance. Because when you go into that, the risk is if I go through all of those courses, get those qualifications, then I don't get that promotion. That now creates a negative feedback loop where I'm like, well, actually, I did all of that and I still didn't get the promotion. So why should I put any effort into building those skills and investing in my learning because it doesn't translate into a promotion? And so I think the focus should really be about its performance that is rewarded. And building those skills, the upskilling, reskilling process is to help you perform better. And when you do that and you apply that learning, that's when that performance is rewarded.
Learning.
Yeah, it absolutely. It's the learning transfer, not the learning that you're rewarding. And I think that's a really important differentiation to have. We're almost coming to the end of the show. So if you've got any questions, do put them in the chat and I'll put them to Ron. So Ron, just kind of closing off, I guess, just heard your show. I'm feeling super hyped and inspired. I want to go change everything about what we do from performance management measurement. Where do I start? What are the first couple of things I can immediately put into practice and start to see some early wins?
Straight away, pick a goal setting methodology that you want to stand by. Have a look at your organization, see what everybody's doing, find a universal company-wide goal-setting methodology and start to build the foundations of what that looks like and build a plan for educating people. Then, of course, pick a goal-setting provider that's going to reach your objectives, so can do exactly what you're looking for. Check your current systems, see if they can achieve what you're after. If they can't, you have another battle to have, which is we need something new or different to deliver on our goals here. Then decide on your approach on how you're going to build your skills matrix, in-house versus external. Again, take it from me, go external here. It's so much better. And picking your partner. And then embed your values into your continuous performance process. So whatever you're doing, think about the topic we thought about, which was attitudes. On top of the skills, the attitudes. And are you reining in as much as you can be to unite people behind that?
And just to pick up on the goal setting in the last few minutes, because we had a customer event yesterday and speaking to some incredible L&D thinkers, and they were sharing their experiences with different goal setting frameworks. Like even at How Now, we've kind of tested out with 2 teams OKRs, and now actually we've moved to using V2 MOM, what was started at Salesforce as an approach of doing it. We're still learning. I think we're trying to see what's a good fit for us, but I'd love to know from the audience, what are the different goal setting approaches you've used? Is there any that you really love that you'd recommend? Love to hear it. But Ron, what are the ones you've tried?
Gosh, well, there's quite a few, but my favorite is definitely SMART goals and KPIs for sure. I think actually something called what I'd call SMART KPIs. So as I said, there's so many different ones here. But ultimately, if you think about where the success of goals have primarily been, I'll point to one area of the business, and they're called revenue, because they're incredibly target focused and it's something you can measure and it's completely tangible. So I would actually say that leveraging their success of having these metric measurements and giving them a purposeful goal above that is going to be, so I call it a SMART KPI, is going to be a very effective way of winning the buy-in of these different methodologies, because it's proven. And actually, corporately, they are the most successful at doing it. It's no other team, it's them. And why? Because it's very clear, it's very measurable, and it's very much, well, if I achieve this, I get my commission. But just one last point here on goals and how this differentiates from team to team. What's interesting is, as we set goals that are completely KPI driven, which is great, what we're really then doing is attracting maybe a certain type of profile to sales who purely see the purpose of their role as the commission they're trying to get. That's why they're doing what they're doing. Whereas not the rest of the company isn't really operating like that. There's purpose we need to install beyond money, right? And actually, there's a lot of sales leaders in particular who aren't just motivated by money. That would be a very inaccurate statement to put out there. They actually do have a purpose, whether it's getting the product to multiple people. And so there's an opportunity there. So actually see your revenue team as an opportunity to build something with them on board, and their KPIs become the milestones of how the goal is really achieved. So installing a purpose, therefore attracting different profiles in that team who may not have done super well, not felt connected, and bringing that methodology to the rest of the org, because everybody's got to be on a consistent and objective playing field in respect to their particular departments.
Ron, it's been an absolute pleasure. I knew this would be incredible, and you lived up to all the hype. So much value bomb dropping going on in this episode. So really appreciate you taking the time out. Thanks to the rest of you for joining. Look out for our next show, which is how to build a search-first learning culture. We'll have the CEO of Scribe, Jennifer Smith, joining us. You can also check out all the future episodes at lu.ma/hownow. Sign up for the future episodes. You'll also be receiving a follow-up with all the show notes and a recording, so you can listen back to all of the good stuff Ron's been sharing. Once again, thank you very much, Ron, for your time, and thank you to everyone else for joining. Have a great week.